nice time with him. Hello, thank you, Marek, for this very kind introduction. I also thank you all for being here so early this morning to listen to a topic which seems quite abstract, which is the organization of sustainable development sciences. What I'm going to try to show and what I try to demonstrate in the report is that I discovered while preparing this report that these sustainable development sciences should be practical and related to the social transformations in progress and the social stakeholders. It seems a bit odd, but the diagnosis of current sciences is appalling, and I was quite astonished with when working with my team. The situation is quite dramatic, not only regarding sustainability, but also regarding the organization of sciences. So the context, I would like to remind briefly the context of this report. Of course, there was a good introduction with the keynote speakers of yesterday regarding the major ecological crisis. This is a slide of the Aral Sea, which is one of the major ecological catastrophes of the last century. As you know, this sea has been dried, twice the size of Belgium, and it has been used for irrigation of cotton fields in Uzbekistan. It's a catastrophe both ecologically, socially, and in terms of public health. First of all, ecological catastrophe because all the species of endemic species of this lake have disappeared. Then socially, all the economy revolving around the lake disappeared. And finally, for public health, the pesticide and insecticide deposits have evaporated afterwards, with as consequences a set of diseases related to exposure of pesticides studied by WHO, and the statistics are appalling regarding children's disease, cancers, etc. So major catastrophe. But example is interesting because of on another account, the cotton fields for which we use the water of this lake enable 500,000 people to work in the cotton industry. So it's employment in Uzbekistan. This cotton enables us to supply Europe in cotton at low price for our own cotton industry. So I think this example shows both the implication of social, ecological and health issues, and on the other hand, the globalization of the issue. And there's a second reason why I decided to show this picture, is that the illustrations I will show in this my presentation are taken by Thierry Demey, who's one of the 4 co-directors of the choreographic Charleroi Dance Center from the French community, and he's an artist with multidisciplinary work, which is in relationship with the lessons of the report. What he's trying to do very precisely, and it's a quite difficult message to convey, but I think that this is well illustrated. With contemporary dance, he is inspired by mathematics and abstract forms of dance, and you'll see that in certain pictures. But he's also working on the presence. This is a topic which I have learned by talking with him. Today we are seeing a real virtualization of knowledge, and you'll see that with the example of economy and the macroeconomic model. Today, people on the Place de la Bourse are with their iPads, they have the mathematical models, they make decisions on the basis of mathematical models of the virtual world. This is exactly this work that Thierry Demey is trying to do, combining the mathematics models, form compression in contemporary mathematics, but finding the implication of the stakeholders, concrete actions, and this combination which is lacking in this in contemporary sciences.
J'essaie de passer, voilà. Alors le contexte du rapport, je vais être relativement bref.
I'll try to be brief. I would like to underline that the data on the slide are not produced by 1 or 2 scientists, but are the result of major reports co-written by thousands of scientists. So first line, degradation of ecosystems, it's a result of 3-4 years of research by 1,500 scientists globally who did an analysis of all ecosystems. It has been controlled by peer review, and the result is very clear. 60% of ecosystems on which human beings depend for their survival are degraded. These voluminous reports are very big, but that's only one conclusion. All the other conclusions in terms of social, public health and environment are appalling, and you know all this data. Global warming, if average temperature increased by 2 degrees or more, I speak under the control of the experts, this change will lead to major ecological and socio-economical evolutions that are very important. The 2007 report says very clearly that in the most positive and optimistic scenarios will have an increase of 1.8 degrees, and most pessimistic will have plus 4 degrees in 2007. So we're already very close to what is mentioned here, and certainly this has to be reviewed upwards. The oil peak, end of low price oil, we know that 60% of the energy needs are relying on oil. Inequalities, it's important also because as you saw in the example of Aral Sea, both are connected. 20% of the world population represent 80% of the private consumption expenditure. We have to add that the other 20%, poorest 20%, represent only 1.3% of global consumption. So we see clearly the inequality in resource consumption, and the ecological challenge is also a social challenge. To this, we have to add that inequalities have increased, including in the OECD countries. We see an increase of inequalities in industrialized countries also. And finally, ecological catastrophes lead to a massive rural exodus with, as consequence, more than 1 billion people living in shanty towns. That's 1/3 of the total global population. This situation is very worrying. It's not the purpose of the report, but it's to place the context. All the factors that cause these crises are continuing to increase in importance. The consumption levels in industrialized countries increase, global population increases, use of resources increases, and energy consumption increases. All the crises I've mentioned before are caused by factors which are continuing to increase.
En réponse à ça, c'est que d'une part, les efforts qu'on entrepris jusque maintenant n'ont pas inversé la tendance dans l'aggravation des crises majeures. La société s'inquiète, preuve is getting worried, hence the success of this Congress is questioning itself and is expecting a political action able to answer these crises. And this is the purpose of the report. The current science has not supplied significant solution to these crises up to now. Strikingly, this financial and economic crisis we know has highlighted the incapacity of economists to understand the events and bring relevant solutions. Not only the 2008 crisis, I'm talking about the cyclic financial bubbles in Latin America, Asia, and 2008 crisis. It's an instability of the financial models which is not taken into account right now. Another example is the incapacity of solutions drafted by scientists to limit GHG emissions, to solve a question of nuclear waste, to stop extinction of biodiversity, and to avoid the destruction of biosystems vital for human beings. What is the situation with science? We're talking about systemic failures generated by a science which has become ethically neutral and virtual. I will repeat that at the end. This is specifically to science of sustainability, for which these two preconceived ideas lead to a lot of problems, but this also applies to other sciences. But it doesn't mean that all sciences, formal and representative, will also have a role to play. An example of this ethically neutral science which has become more and more virtual, the example of financial macroeconomics. Two failures have been demonstrated by the best economists, Nobel Prizes, etc. And despite that, we still work with these models. First point is
ethical neutralization. The science and ethics are totally uncoupled. How does it work in macroeconomics? The model we use today and which we continue to use are based on abstract modeling of balance and for constraints of calculability, which leads to a systematic marginalization of the question of systemic risk and instabilities of the financial system, which are precisely elements which require the ethical positioning with respect to crisis. What is our collective responsibility for a system which is not calculable? Would we give ourselves the illusion that is calculable? How do we produce this illusion? You can read that in the report. Either by the reduction to probabilistic models, but it's precisely those models that are being used by people at the stock exchange on their iPads. They use this model on a daily basis, but the science shows that these models are too abstract to be able to be confronted to data, either on defining these risks as external to the responsibility of market participants. That's a quote of a Nobel Prize in economy saying that these risks are external to my models. The economy can't deal with that. So macroeconomics will design risk as exogenous shocks, which are not coming under the responsibility of banks. That's how the model works. Second part of the report is that even if we were able to couple mathematic models to ethical science and have a debate on the responsibility for risk, the new problem emerging is virtualization of knowledge. The ethic and mathematic models can remain abstract and uncoupled from the effective social transformation and the type of commitments stakeholders can make. That's where we'll have the topic of transdisciplinarity, which is a growing concern. In economics, it's very clear that the models are based on social and human models that proofs have contradicted. Economists are totally agree, but they will say that the models pretend to. There's a lot of literature, and precisely for sustainable development sciences, we can't work with that because the agents are behaving like representative agents to calculate probabilities on future events in order to maximize their usefulness. But this contrasts with the social dynamics at stake in the real world. What is the consequence of this virtualization of knowledge and uncoupling of ethics? For macroeconomics, this is valid for all sciences, not only for economics, but the consequences are specific. First of all, we have a cyclic financial crisis, accepted by these mathematical models. It reinforces a short-term mentality, short-term financial gains, and is unfavorable to long-term sustainable practices. Of course, there are heterodox economists, and it's mentioned in the report, but in the dominating model, it's more interesting, financially speaking, to invest in derivatives based on forests, to cut these forests, reinvest money in the financial cycle, because short-term it's better gains, but long-term we have instability and non-predictability, and so these investments are totally motivated by the system. Absence of regulations that take into account the social dynamics, like monetary speculation or gregarious behaviors that can lead to recurrent crises. Nevertheless, let's be very clear on that. These models are always still used in the models drafted by the International Monetary Fund, the Federal Council, Federal Reserve Council, the European Central Bank, and several other central banks. So the concept of crisis as exogenous shocks with respect to the mathematic model is the model which is still being used to advise public decision makers. Alternatives are being built, and in the report I tried to mention these alternatives and not draw any conclusion based on an abstract philosophy. We did a list of all the alternatives to try to see if there are alternatives that are effective and what are the common points of these alternatives. That's the conclusion of the report. One of the alternatives, there are many, is the post-Keynesian economy with a certain set of hypotheses that seem interesting in the perspective of a science of sustainability. These models accept uncertainty, the historic nature of economic systems, instead of assuming that all systems tend to balance, the impact of, well, the fact that macroeconomics is related to microeconomics, the impact of social rationality, which is taken into account, and the focus on the growth of well-being of individuals, not only the system of price stabilization, not only inflation, but price in post-Keynesian economy is a social construction. And finally, taking into account the intrinsic limits of natural resources in growth hypothesis, macroeconomic models which assume 2% growth, someone verified that we had the adequate natural resources to do this growth of 2%. These pathologies are present in several other fields that influence political choices, and for each field there are alternatives that are growing but that are not dominating. Theory of innovating systems. When we talk about financing of public research, we talk about public property rights, and we're talking about the concept of supporting technology development to support growth. What is the central question of the innovation systems? How can we generate new innovations as efficiently as possible? It's the standard theory used by OECD, giving statistics, analysis, and recommendations on the basis of this theory. However, this theory, even if it's valid, I wanted to say it with the introduction on the choreographer of Charles Radance. The idea is not to reject mathematics, complexity, and what it has led to in terms of human development, but reintegrating these developments in the social context and ethics. So these theories are disconnected from the transition social dynamics, from the question of coordination between innovation system stakeholders, users, and stakeholders. Hence the blocking problems in the introduction of new technologies regarding sustainability. Even the sustainable management of natural resources, sort of reference science to solve the ecological problem, the environmental sciences are suffering from the same pathology. A concept in central question is how to have the maximum sustainable yield in the productivity of ecosystems. It's a concept which is clearly criticized by biologists, which is no longer unanimous, but in the European fishing policy of the European Union, it's this theory which is used. If we want to regulate fishing at sea, we have this theory which is pathological, but it is disconnected from the social, ecological analysis of the functionality of the living systems, as well as from the maintenance of social practices which preserve these functionalities. There are appalling examples of sudden shifts of systems, fishing systems in the north of Canada, for instance, which had not been foreseen by politics and which have led to disastrous public policies. And with respect to these public policies, it's the same with crisis and risk of the economic system. After, it's the taxpayer who has to pay for that. Another example, the management of a major natural park in the Florida Everglades. In the 90s, they developed models to simulate the freshwater needs of the system. On this basis, they injected water into this ecosystem, but they didn't take into account the change in behavior of farmers who changed and started using less water. And due to this model, which was uncoupled from the stakeholders, they destroyed the ecosystem. They realized it quite fast, and now they have to do an effort of restoration, and the restoration effort is the most expensive for an ecosystem in the USA, on the basis of scientific models supplied by environmental sciences. So there's a real pathology of sciences. It's also a good lesson learned. We realize that we have to change sciences for sustainability.
Economic theories of growth, you all know that we focus on GDP in the media, in the press. This standard theory is used by politicians, but again, and I don't need to tell you because you already know, many studies have demonstrated that there's no systematic link with the welfare of individuals, social progress, or human development. So what is the main response provided by people who try in those various fields to provide alternatives? First, the emergence of solutions requires the efforts of all, including the scientific world. Nobel Prizes such as Elena Gustrom, they try to transform methods and thoughts and to find practices and organization modes within scientific institutions. We have to change our way of thinking. And here I found three main responses in the report. That's multidisciplinarity. That's the first slide.
Et finalement, j'ai aussi reconnecté avec l'éthique du développement durable. Alors l'interdisciplinarité, ici, c'est un manuel d'une chorégraphie. On voit bien que ça combine à la fois les théories mathématiques du chaos, donc des compréhensions qui nous ont été fournies par les sciences formelles, mais on retrouve aussi la présence, les formes du corps, etc. Et donc on trouve une pratique interdisciplinaire au sein d'une pratique chorégraphique. Quel est le point clé de ce modèle d'interdisciplinarité? C'est pour ça que j'ai mis cette phrase-là. Ça combine une description analytique des systèmes socio-économiques complexes avec l'analyse des pratiques sociales. Donc, ce n'est pas uniquement une interdisciplinarité entre, par exemple, l'économie et les sciences de l'environnement, mais c'est l'interdisciplinarité qui va jusqu'à inclure une analyse des pratiques sociales et des voies de transition. Deuxième réponse, et là, on est de nouveau avec la mère d'Aran. Ces sciences doivent se coupler façon systématique à une éthique de durabilité forte, c'est-à-dire une éthique qui reconnaisse les limites intrinsèques de la biosphère. Là, non plus, il n'y a pas question de dogmatique, ce n'est pas une sorte de critère que toutes les sciences doivent satisfaire, non. Il faut que les sciences intègrent dans la présentation de leurs résultats un positionnement critique par rapport à l'éthique du durabilité. Donc si dans certaines situations, on pourrait avoir un découplage relatif et donc pas absolu, entre introduction de nouvelles technologies et utilisation de ressources, il se peut qu'il y a des situations,
but in some situations it might be justified not to have an absolute decoupling or separation. And I refer you to the keynote speeches that we heard yesterday. We can have a strong sustainability of ethics, and the scientist has to explain why we need to do this decoupling. He has to explain how it works in the scientific practice. The second item, there must be a discussion of a strong and sustainable ethics. And the second idea, which is linked to sciences, transdisciplinarity. What does that mean? It means that you combine scientific expertise with social expertise. These people are experts because they have a practical involvement and they have learned in the field. Here you can see a 5-line parade. This is a choreography with 3 people. This was done at the castle of Senef in Belgium. So if you follow one color on these lines, you can take part in this choreography. This is very successful. People like to pretend they are a dancer doing a choreography, modern choreography. Second axis, if indeed you see those drastic facts and some conclusions are drawn that seem rather ambitious, we need to change the organization method, because the way institutions function now, this is not going in towards multidisciplinarity, not integrating debates on sustainability and transdisciplinarity. So this is also true of sustainable sciences. Some experts have analyzed 1,500 articles as a peer review expliciting sustainability. In these articles that you can split in 3 sections, either in environmental science magazines or economic magazines or social science magazines, we have seen what is the frequency of those articles referring to other fields. Very often you have less references in environmental science journals, and they talk about cross-references. 85% of environmental science magazines are not multi-field. The situation is slightly better in social and economic journals because there are less, and and because they're building on a niche, and so they have to refer to other fields. But it's obvious that we are very far from this great message of a possible change of sustainable sciences. There are some axes for development, and in conclusion I wanted to show you some initiatives that have been carried out in other countries and that are promising and source of inspiration. So first we need to develop new inciting methods to promote careers in sustainable development. Scientists, we need to look for training methods that look for more quality than quantity. We need to put an end to the domination of single field reviews by pairs. It's the fact that they only focus on a single field. So what happens when you submit a multi-field article? Well, you're cheating. In fact, you're rewriting your multi-discipline fields as a mono-field project so that the assessment committee will approve it. Because if you have a multi-field project, you have to be judged by several experts who don't know anything about the other fields, and they're always not satisfied because they don't understand why you're using this or that method belonging to another field. So I guess that many people could confirm this in the audience. I see many people smiling. But the peer review can be reformed, and since there are some specialists that are emerging from this transdisciplinary method, it would be easy to build a list of experts who have been trained in those sciences and who could become the new experts of peer review for these particular objects. And finally, we need to set up new organizational scientific tools so as to make this new science method last over time, not just making minor changes. We need to find inspiration in existing successes. These are examples I've already mentioned. First category, high-level
là où c'est facile de commencer à faire des changements. Ici, c'est simplement pour montrer que ce n'est pas dans les grandes universités nécessairement. C'est une petite université en Allemagne qui a initié un programme de recherche socio-économique dans lequel d'emblée les disciplines naturelles et sociales sont couplées et les acteurs de la société, les consommateurs, autorités locales, entreprises, ONG sont impliqués dans le design de projets de recherche. Ce n'est pas de la consultance, c'est véritablement explorer les voies de transition faisables et légitimes dans la société. Ils ont aussi un master international où les cours sont les sciences de l'environnement, l'économie et l'éthique. On enseigne les mêmes cours à un panel d'étudiants de master. Et il y a chaque fois des soutiens pour ce programme. Une étape plus loin, et c'est un des exemples à mon avis les plus développés aujourd'hui, c'est l'université de Tokyo, c'est le Graduate School of Frontier. Alors ils ont fait plein de choses là-bas. Donc c'est un peu trop ambitieux pour nous, mais ça nous inspire quand même. D'une part, l'université a construit un partenariat avec une ville pour un projet de développer des low carbon solutions, donc des solutions faibles en carbone dans tout le quartier.
In the whole neighborhood. This requires that you have to work on elderly people and mobility, on lighting, on the architecture, urban green spaces, and so on. So it requires that they have to develop many different projects in partnership with the university researchers, exploring various ways with the local population and providing technical solutions. They also organize a master's degree, but in this training they also include transdisciplinarity. That means that the students working, studying in these masters are going to spend 2 months in the Kashiwa neighborhood, and they're going to interview the during multi-stakeholder workshops. So as to test the subject they are developing in their master's degree. This is also a university that has created a new journal. So they are very active, and I think that they can be a good source of inspiration to show us what we can do in universities. Beyond that,
il y a des initiatives de recherche programmatique.
Je
dirais qu'en Belgique, au niveau de Belfort, on voit déjà ces initiatives. Il y a déjà une expérience à ce niveau-là pour le projet interdisciplinaire et transdisciplinaire. Et c'est évidemment quelque chose à saluer, à développer davantage. Ici, de nouveau, malheureusement, c'est nouveau un exemple du Japon. Je n'ai pas fait exprès parce que dans le rapport, l'objet n'était pas de faire une analyse systématique des exemples existants. Ici, on va pas plus loin au niveau de la recherche programmatique. C'est que
go much further in terms of program research, but in research, scientists do internships, so they're going to spend 2, 3, 4 months with the social stakeholders in the neighborhood where they're doing research, and in this project they try to acquire some knowledge or skills on this collaboration method. So they have some orientations on collaboration with the local stakeholders that scientific experts are using. So you have the local stakeholders, you have the lab scientists, and in between you have some knowledge brokers, interfaces who do the interface between these two worlds, and one of their tools are the guidelines on collaboration. And finally, a third level, after the changes in institutions, you have the transformation of program research. We need to think of the long-term institutionalization with the idea of doing a progressive change. It is important to institutionalize. Ideally, we would like to create independent and standalone institution research. The network for transdisciplinary research has been going on since 2008, and they work in different fields. So what do we know about successes and failures in sustainable development? They also organize a national conference on interdisciplinarity and transdisciplinarity. Here we have a nice example in this particular conference, and they grant rewards from the Swiss Academy for Transdisciplinary Research. They also have a methodological manual. They have many things online. That's a progressive institutionalization of sustainable development sciences. So what could I say in terms of conclusion for this report? Well, as I said in my introduction, this is an unprecedented sustainable development crisis that we're facing at the global level, and we will not be able to raise to this challenge by simply analyzing the current sciences and their impact at the public level as the Everglades in Florida. We can see the consequences or impact of traditional sciences. We have to put science back into a discussion on sustainability ethics. So there is an urgent need because the sustainability crisis is calling for emergent solutions. We need to set up new research paths, and we don't want to replace what already exists, but we want to set up some parallel fields and to include them in universities. We have already tested some research fields in the early 20th centuries with applied sciences. When the MIT in the US started to do applied research, work in collaboration with the industries, people said, what is this? This is not science, this is not university business. And now everybody accepts that you can study engineering at university. That's part of university, but that was not obvious at the end of the 19th century. And again, we have the same urgency for including transdisciplinary, interdisciplinary fields
dans une vision progressive, de nouveaux incitants pour promouvoir les nouvelles pratiques scientifiques basées sur la transdisciplinarité, l'interdisciplinarité et l'éthique Et le message est bien, et ça on essaie de détailler plus dans le rapport également, qu'il faut combiner les trois à la fois. Si on fait uniquement de l'interdisciplinarité et de l'éthique forte, on reste dans l'abstrait et on ne donne pas une réponse à la virtualisation du savoir. On ne réintroduit pas l'acteur présent dans son engagement concret au sein même de l'exploration des voies de transition. Voilà, ça c'est la conclusion du rapport. Merci pour votre attention. Encore une petite photo de chorégraphie prise sur un gratte-ciel à Bruxelles, qui pour moi résume bien les différents aspects de présence corporelle, d'interdisciplinarité et de modernité également. Il ne s'agit évidemment pas de mettre la modernité sur le côté. Je tiens aussi en conclusion à remercier les personnes du cabinet qui m'ont accompagné dans ce rapport, qui dans les critiques évidemment ont été cruciales pour avancer. Je remercie aussi les gens de mon équipe et du comité d'accompagnement scientifique et académique, dont certains sont présents également.
Support committee. Some people
Thierry Hans, Université catholique de Louvain. Merci pour cet exposé qui est extrêmement intéressant et qui met en lumière toute une série de choses. Bon, en tant que scientifique écologiste, je voudrais quand même intervenir sur un point par rapport à cette pathologie des sciences pour faire remarquer que quelque part, c'est quand même aussi des scientifiques qui ont mis en évidence, déjà il y a très longtemps, les changements climatiques, la crise de la biodiversité, qui ont fait des appels et qui ont fait quelque part bouger le monde politique. Donc c'est vrai qu'il y a une certaine pathologie des sciences, mais je ne suis pas sûr que ce soit une pathologie des sciences. C'est une pathologie de notre modèle de développement qui fait qu'on finance les sciences d'une certaine façon et qu'à un certain moment, ben voilà, il y a des scientifiques qui sont sortis malgré tout de là, qui conservent une vision, je dirais, plus globale avec de l'éthique, avec des choses qui sont dedans.
Merci beaucoup. Non, non, ça c'est très très important à souligner et c'est un point difficile à expliquer. Donc, le socle de tout ça, c'est bien la science, c'est bien la modernité, c'est bien de là qu'on part. Le problème, c'est que c'est le mode d'organisation de la science. Donc, c'est la façon dont la science est organisée dans son lien avec la société, avec les politiques qui posent problème aujourd'hui. Et ça joue doublement, ça joue au niveau des pathologies qui peuvent proposer des concepts qui sont découplés et qui si tu veux, renforcent le découplage et par l'éthique, par une sorte de rhétorique d'auto-affirmation. Mais ça joue aussi par ces scientifiques qui ont écrit ces rapports sur la biodiversité, sur le changement climatique, qui sont frustrés de constater que malgré la multiplication de ces rapports, on n'arrive pas à créer la transition. Il y a évidemment plein de choses positives qui se passent, mais pas une transition massive de nos sociétés. Donc ça joue de deux façons. Mais bien sûr, même si on parviendrait à réorganiser la science, c'est-à-dire avoir un autre mode d'organisation qui réintègre les sciences dans le débat démocratique sur l'éthique et dans des voies de transition concrètes sur le terrain, par exemple dans les politiques au niveau des villes qui se développent beaucoup aujourd'hui, même si on parvient, le socle reste la science. Donc il s'agit bien si tu veux, de réinventer la modernité scientifique en organisant autrement sa connexion avec les acteurs. Donc, je pense que c'est une remarque très très importante qu'il ne faut évidemment pas oublier.
Oui, Dominique Méda, je suis professeure de sociologie à Dauphine, je suis ici. Et depuis un an, j'ai eu la chance de pouvoir développer une chaire que j'ai appelée reconversion écologie, travail, emploi, politique sociale, dans un endroit non classique, c'est-à-dire un nouvel endroit qui s'appelle le Collège d'études mondiales au sein de la Fondation des maisons de sciences de l'homme. Donc déjà un truc pas très classique. Et donc depuis un an, je développe un séminaire. Je le développe avec Isabelle Cassis et on essaye de faire tout à fait ce que vous avez présenté, c'est-à-dire de l'interdisciplinaire et du transdisciplinaire. On espère d'ailleurs que beaucoup de gens ici pourront venir à notre séminaire. Alors, je trouve que ce que vous avez fait, c'est extrêmement important. Je trouve que vous avez bien diagnostiqué les principaux points de résistance et ils sont énormes, notamment sur l'évaluation des chercheurs, les promotions, les revues. Et j'ai deux questions. Premièrement, est-ce que faire ça, ça ne signifie pas quand même un coût d'entrée considérable, y compris pour les chercheurs qui participent. Vous voyez, quand on invite des économistes, moi par exemple j'ai fait de l'économie à un super niveau, donc ça suppose que chacun des participants vraiment aille en dehors de sa discipline, enfin aille au plus loin. Et comment on peut faire ça? Et ma deuxième question, est-ce que, je pense qu'il y a comment dirais-je, des blocages sur les fondements épistémologiques. Est-ce que chaque science doit pousser au plus loin ses hypothèses et ses actions, en quelque sorte, ses présupposés méthodologiques, ou est-ce qu'il ne faut pas carrément passer à une espèce de nouvelle science qui précisément devrait fabriquer de nouvelles hypothèses, de nouveaux actions, et est-ce que ça n'est pas uniquement de cette façon qu'on pourrait s'en sortir? Autrement dit, est-ce qu'on ne va pas revoir les fondements épistémologiques de chacune de ces sciences?
Voilà, merci beaucoup. Je n'ai pas osé utiliser le terme épistémologique parce qu'évidemment, ça demande une explication, mais je pense que c'est bien ça le point. Par rapport à votre première question, le coût que ça demande pour les chercheurs et l'investissement, je crois qu'il est important. Le challenge est énorme, mais le challenge n'est pas différent de l'autre transformation qui a eu lieu, par exemple, au début du XXe siècle, quand on a inventé les sciences appliquées, ou au début du XIXe siècle, quand Humboldt a dit
century with applied sciences, or when in the 19th century, Paul said, well, we need to lead science towards a new field because it was only linked to teaching before. So I think that this is a big change, but it's not impossible. We raised to a challenge before, we can still raise to a challenge now. Now, in terms of epistemology, I think that if we talk about different modes of organization for research, it requires to change epistemology completely. And this is why the report is a report on the organization method of research for sustainability. So if you need a technician for the fire safety of this building, don't give me a transdisciplinary scientist. I just want the traditional scientist who will do the traditional calculations without taking anything else into account. There are specific organizational methods that are needed for sustainability scientists, and I think that now it's obvious that we need to create different fields and support them so that it works, but the other organizational methods will keep existing, as in applied sciences, you still have pure sciences, and sometimes they can provide some tools that can be used by sustainability scientists, a mathematician who would invent new topologies. We could mention many examples, but these might be tools for sustainability sciences, sustainable development, but this has to organize in a completely different way. Two brief questions, this gentleman here and there, and then I suggest that you asked both questions first and Tom will answer. Mr. Connelly from
je suis vraiment très intéressé par votre rapport parce que moi aussi je passe mon temps, je suis un colloqueux, pas un coliqueux, j'espère. Et donc je vais dans différentes disciplines et je suis frappé de voir effectivement que chacun a des connaissances pointues dans des domaines, mais ne fait très mal les relations. Et là, c'est bien sûr Descartes qui est le grand responsable de ça, qui avait dit si vous avez des difficultés, coupez-les en petits morceaux, en disciplines, en sous-disciplines. Et maintenant ces disciplines disons, ne se connaissent plus l'une l'autre. Il y a des trous noirs épouvantables. Mais ce qui me frappe ici, et je l'avais dit à Dominique Méda hier aussi, c'est que nous nous présentons ici comme des hommes rationnels. Et c'est très beau et c'est une belle vision idéaliste que je partage, mais par contre, je crois qu'il faut reconnaître que nous sommes aussi des êtres, je dirais, du doute, mais aussi, comme dit Edgar Morin, des êtres démens. Nous disons sapiens sapiens, mais nous sommes aussi démens. Et donc, en anthropologie, moi je demanderais d'aborder aussi la question de ce que nous, en épistémologie, donc science de la connaissance, ce que nous ne savons pas voir, mais aussi ce que nous ne voulons pas voir et ce qu'on nous empêche de voir.
Deuxième question, et puis...
Oui. Alain Henry, ici, je travaille à la Task Force Développement Durable au Bureau fédéral du Plan, dans une équipe qui essaye d'être transdisciplinaire, qui fait un maximum pour cela. Vous parlez de la science classique et de ses limitations. Bon, la science classique fournit déjà toute une série de pistes, il y a toute une série de choses dont on sait que si on les mettait en œuvre, ça résoudrait toute une série des problèmes auxquels l'humanité fait face, changement climatique, biodiversité. Et il me semble que la difficulté actuelle, ce n'est pas au niveau d'une science interdisciplinaire, transdisciplinaire, qui est à développer, et les pistes que vous proposez sont sûrement utiles, mais il y a aussi un message à développer pour la collectivité, les autorités publiques, l'ensemble des acteurs de la société qui collectivement ne mettent pas en place ces solutions. Et ce que j'aimerais entendre d'études comme celles que vous mettez en place, c'est justement qu'est-ce que vous proposez comme piste, non seulement pour le monde académique, mais aussi pour ces autres mondes politiques, civils, sociaux, ONG, etc. Merci.
Voilà, merci beaucoup pour ces deux questions. Peut-être par rapport à la première question, bon, et bien sûr, il y a Descartes, il y a la modernité mathématique et les enjeux de recoupler avec l'expérience humaine, l'inconscient, etc. J'ai essayé de souligner un nouvel enjeu qui, en plus de ça, émerge aujourd'hui, qui est la virtualisation. Et c'est lié au développement de l'informatique, des outils de simulation, etc., qui sont chaque fois des outils qui donnent des opportunités terribles à l'être humain, aussi bien les mathématiques cartésiennes que maintenant les outils de communication par Internet, des calculs, etc., mais qui posent chaque fois un nouveau défi, un nouveau danger. Donc la virtualisation, clairement, est un de ces dangers. Par rapport au contexte plus large, bien sûr, c'est une des limites du rapport. J'ai essayé de commencer à faire le pont avec la question de l'enseignement. C'est-à-dire, le nouveau mode de recherche va être couplé à de nouveaux modes d'enseignement de façon à former les cadres qui ensuite vont se retrouver dans le département public, dans lequel ces mêmes pratiques peuvent être mises en œuvre. Parce que, idéalement, le mode d'organisation qui est mis en évidence, c'est le mode d'organisation du savoir, pas uniquement de la science. C'est-à-dire que la connexion avec la réflexion démocratique sur l'éthique et avec les acteurs sociaux en situation devrait pouvoir se faire au niveau du savoir scientifique, au niveau de l'enseignement et l'éducation et des cabinets, des bureaucraties, des institutions ce qui est problématique. Je pense que là, on peut apprendre à partir de ce qui se passe dans les sciences, c'est les compétences. Il faut des compétences spécifiques pour faire ça. On n'invente pas ça. Quelqu'un qui doit faire la transdisciplinarité doit ajouter à une compétence scientifique les compétences de négociation, de mise en situation, d'aller voir les acteurs. Et je pense que ces compétences-là, on essaie de mieux les comprendre en mettant en œuvre ces pratiques scientifiques, mais ils devraient être idéalement présents également au niveau de l'enseignement, au niveau de l'éducation des jeunes et expérimenter au niveau des institutions de conseil. Et un des points intéressants des expériences au Japon, c'est qu'en travaillant sur ces trois plans-là, on peut construire des points relais, c'est-à-dire les partenariats, par exemple, entre universités et certaines villes. Et je sais qu'il y a des projets en Belgique, par exemple, à Leuven et à Gand, ils se construisent ce type de partenariat également. Ces partenariats peuvent s'étendre à des points relais, des organisations qui commencent à avoir l'habitude de faire de la recherche ou aussi de la politique transdisciplinaire et se mettre en binôme avec des équipes universitaires. Je pense que ce type de changement progressif peut être une piste
Change could be one way of approaching this. Thank you very much for your questions.